Hello, beloved. I am Pastor VictorResendiz. Welcome to this weekly series called God is Love, conversations on compassion, justice, and spirituality. Each week, we will explore our role as Christian believers in today's national dialogue around race and racism. We'll be joined by Liz Peterson, Assistant Director of Houston Coalition Against Hate, a network of organizations, institutions, and individuals committed to preventing and addressing all forms of hate in our community. We invite you to listen for the transforming Word of God, as together we seek to fully embody the great commandment to love God and love neighbor. Welcome back, everyone. This is our fifth and final conversation of this God is Love series. Liz and I are going to take a sort of a break, but it's more of a preparation break where we're going to take the next 2 weeks to prepare and go through a lot of the information and the feedback that we've been getting on that has everything from questions, comments, curiosities, topics that people want us to discuss. So Liz and I are going to discern through all that and then create another series for us to have these type of conversations. And then the neat thing about it is, just like last week we had Pastor Colin Bagby with us, this week we have Pastor Michael Jarboe with us. Welcome, Michael. Thank you so much for being with us. And so the idea is that in the next series, we're going to invite our other clergy as well as part of these discussions. So we're so glad that you all have been providing us with your comments, with your feedback, with your compliments, with your curiosities, and in some cases, even some very thought-provoking questions. And I think that's what it's all about. So as I've said before, we don't have all the answers. What we're trying to do is share our own experience of how we're learning more about this topic and how we are trying to apply our Christian principles into the life of the community and how we can display God's compassion and love to others. So anyways, well, welcome, Michael. Thank you again for joining us. Liz, good to see you again. So let's get started. Last week, I asked Pastor Colin Bagby. I keep calling him Colin Bagby. Pastor Colin.
Bagby.
Sorry, very formal. Pastor Colin, I asked a question to reflect on, and he gave us some great, just a great reflection based on his experience. So I'm going to do the same with you, Michael. Pastor Michael Jarboe. So the question that I'm asking is, what or who has helped you become more aware of how race and racism are at work in your life, in your community?
Yeah, such a good question. And I would say it's taken a village for me, and I hope it does for other people. And some people just have that one person that was influential. For me, I can just list a few that come to mind, but it's been really, again, like I said, like a village that's helped me to come to my understanding. I grew up in Irving, Texas, in an area that was in race very diverse. The zip code I grew up in is one of the more diverse zip codes in our country, and definitely in the DFW area. A large Hispanic and Black and even Indian communities there, especially in northern Irving, where I kind of was centrally located. And you know, I kind of grew up around the principle of color blindness. Like that was sort of what was taught and instilled in me. Like, and I thought that was sort of progressive, right? And in the early 90s, like that was what was kind of taught to me. And I don't know if that was taught by all white parents in the Dallas suburbs, but sure. I felt that was like an honoring of seeing the people with no color. And we're all one, right? And and that beautiful unity there. And so I have deep relationships with people of color from my childhood that I still hold on to. A lot of them would come over to my house on Christmas Eve and on Christmas morning. My mom, the house she sort of curated was one where people came in all the time at different places. Every Christmas, our dinner table looked different, and that was the beauty of it. You had your regulars, and then you had always some different folks. So it was just sort of organic in that regard. I kind of kept that mentality even going into undergrad in Shreveport, Louisiana, which is a very racially divisive city, but really more white and black. And while I was there, the very first black mayor, Cedric Glover, was put into office. And I mean, this guy was like just a huge, like
Sure.
walking kindness. Like, it was like, you can't not be a Cedric Glover fan. But I didn't realize the depth of, Shreveport's 300-year history. They've never had a black leader in their top office for their city. And so I learned a little bit about like all the pressures and some of the low-lying comments that were really said around and more than ever, guys, in church settings.
Sure.
I heard those, words that were said. And so, in fact, conversations with Cedric Glover that I got to have, I was a senior at Centenary College, and found some really, and he just continued to say, the joy you're showing me, Michael, is not the joy I get from all people, all white people. And I just said, that is ridiculous. We shouldn't see color, right? We should all be very comfortable with everyone, right? So I went to that. Then I moved up to Chicago, Illinois, freshly married, 23, 24 years old.
Sure.
And went to Garrett Evangelical Seminary, say the whole name, nickname Getz. And I went up to Getz, and right on Northwestern's campus, a place Liz knows very well. Go Cats. And it was a very diverse student body at Garrett, and a lot of Midwesterners. In fact, one of my dear friends grew up in Kenosha, Wisconsin, in which we're seeing a lot on the news about recently. And so the Midwesterners would flock there, but I came and I was kind of one of the lone Texans up there at the school. And it was fascinating the ways that they had something called the Center for the Church of the Black Experience there. And I was like, what is that all about? And I remember just digging deeper and trying to understand what these experiences were about. And I allowed myself to just be vulnerable to a point and allow some deconstruction in order for more construction. And the truth is, like, we have to do that in so many areas of our lives. And like, even when you're working out, when you have to break down the muscles to build them back stronger. And so I came in with that posture of like curiosity, which, is a hard thing to do. And maybe even harder for white, straight men who don't ever have to be put into a place where they're curious, don't have to really struggle much at all. And so I decided to do my best to enter in there. And I remember one experience that came through, and her name is Keisha, and she went to Garrett with me, and she was a PhD student when I was just a grad student. And Keisha worked in the office of for like getting all the like recruitment office. And I helped out there. I gave tours to upcoming, I'm like a cheerleader of any organization I'm a part of. So I was like Team Garrett, right? And I'd show students around there. And so I go in, and Keisha and I had a great relationship, always talked. We're very, it was just like jovial. She liked me. She actually went to the high school where my dad went to in Maryland. So we had this like, it was weird, like connection here. And I remember one time I said to Keisha, I said, I was making some sort of comment. I just said, girl, please, what are you talking about? And I remember her stopping me, and she goes, Michael, you can't call me girl. And there's a lot behind those words. And so as your friend, I want to just stop you and make you aware that this isn't the first time you've said girl. And I know it's coming from a good place because you're a good person, but the stings of it And from what I've understood my mother and my grandmother,
Oh, wow.
girl has a derogatory name. And I mean, I was frozen in my tracks.
Wow.
I am not rarely speechless, but it was like it was in caving of my heart, but
Sure.
also like an opening of my heart.
Wow. Wow.
And I was fortunate to have made a mistake and have someone there to teach me about it. And I think a lot of people are more afraid of the pain that feeling it
Sure.
has.
Sure.
And maybe if I had seen it coming a long way away, I wouldn't have entered into it. But
sure.
sometimes you have to be able to make
Sure.
that mistake to have that pain kind of occur.
Yes.
And I know that sounds like what you just said. You just called her girl. Like that's one little no.
Correct.
It
Correct.
was like a breaking open in a way.
Yes.
I've never, and I was able to like. I'm kind of getting goosebumps right now. I was able to like thank her for that moment right before I graduated, and she was still wrapping up her PhD.
Yeah.
And she was like, I mean, you know, she was just shocked that I remembered that. You know, it was, you know, but it was a huge piece for me. And so, like, Keisha is one example, but just my eyes were truly opened in Chicago. My eyes, you know, I've always somehow had this heart for anti-gun violence and seeing the differences that occur with depending on who the murderer is and what the color of their skin and treated does not fall lost on me. And so, you know, I've witnessed it, I've seen it. It's just it's heartbreaking. Chicago really broke me open, and I'm still a person learning in progress, but I could pinpoint that moment with Keisha, but there are so many other moments of I can't not say this question without sharing my friend Marcus. Marcus is my best friend. We grew up in the children's choir at First Methodist in Irving, Texas, and Marcus today is an accountability partner. He's the one that pushes me. He's the one that says, before you post that, ask me. And I have taken him up on that in several ways. I'm always learning from him. I think about Eleanor Colvin, another clergy person, a friend of ours. I think about Rudy Rasmus. Those are names in my short list of people who are my accountability partners that I really. They said, Michael, we know you have good intentions, but just let us be your sounding board. And
that's great.
It's a gift. So,
you know, I think about this, and I definitely want to hear if Liz has any reflections regarding to what you just told us. But what I'm thinking about is tied to what Colin said last week about having a kenosis disposition. You know, and what your story, what you're saying is, instead of getting defensive, you were okay to sit and learn and then to listen into this person's experience, not based on your critical eye or what you thought about it or whether she was exaggerating or not. Basically, you, like you said, you were stopped in your tracks and then you listened in to this person's heart, what that represented. And so you didn't have to understand why it triggered her the way it did, or you didn't have to compare your experience with her, nothing. It was just this openness of saying, oh, wow, I didn't realize that. And that kenosis disposition, I think is something that we're called to do as Christians, that everybody has different traumas and hurts and pain. In this specific topic of racism, it even goes further in, because she just mentioned generational. So our disposition should be that, is more of to listening, to learn, and to just hear it out. And it has nothing to do with me anymore. It's more of this, I'm in this person's, at this person's sort of become a student of their experience, you know. What do you think, Liz? Any thoughts on what Michael shared with us?
Yeah, it just reminded me of my days in Evanston, some of the mistakes that I made, the ways that I put my foot in my mouth, walking into my first real situation of diversity, and how I wish I could go back to the Keishas of my life and especially in Evanston, and apologize and you know, really get to know some people at a different, deeper level than I allowed myself to. I was a sociology minor, and I took a lot of classes that really opened my eyes to inequality in our country. And now, just, you know, years later, I would like to, you know, go back and take those classes again and have a richer discussion.
Me too.
And I was able to.
Yeah, no, that's it. Yeah. And it's an ongoing lesson in learning. And I don't want to get too much into my story, but just to give you the other side, the people color experience. I just saw my sisters last night, and we were just having conversation. They kind of kept up with the series as well. And one of the things, speaking of church, where we find this frequent growing up as a bilingual individual, when my first experience of coexisting in a church congregation with a white community was their pastor, and this was a Baptist church, their pastor assuming that we wanted a Spanish speaking service. So they set up the gym for us to gather there and have our Spanish speaking service. And I just remember being a kid, you know, I was a teenager then, and just going, why can't I, but that's just the way I've always been. Why can't I go and worship over there in the sanctuary with everyone else?
Yeah.
Or that in the English speaking space, why do I have to be here based on this? Later on, of course, I'm understanding more of this work. It's like, that's the assumption, right? You're brown, so go with the brown people, or you're Spanish speaker, so you must want to worship in your language. And so when we're talking about how at church, because we haven't done this type of inner work, we fall into these assumptions, which is tied to what we're going to talk about today. And Liz is going to help us. She's going to unravel this topic a little bit more about stereotypes. And so this pre-assumption, right, of what we preconceive of what groups should be like or act like or prefer, or without not necessarily knowing.
And so I do want to clarify one little thing in that when I talked about that, am I angry about being taught colorblindness as a child? No. But I've come such a far way from that. And I don't think we can teach colorblindness today to our children, or it shouldn't be what we institute. We have the ability to see color. I think that's sort of my journey, is I've got to see color more clearly over time. And I appreciate the inclusive nature, but at the same time, color blindness increases this ability to make assumptions.
That's right.
Color blindness breeds assumption making, and we then begin to make those decisions based on,
correct.
Again, I don't see color, but you should probably do this, or
that's right. That's
this
right.
is probably what's here, or I'm gonna take the safe route and not go that, not touch on that, because we're all one. And then it can breed anger too, it can breed why are you talking about just Black lives? Well,
sure.
We have to witness Black lives. We never said all lives don't matter, right?
Correct.
So
exactly.
It's important for us to be aware and be teachable.
That's right. That's right. Love that. Yeah.
Mm-hmm.
So Liz, you have something for us today on stereotypes. So I'll let you.
Yeah. I think it does go really well with what you guys were saying. Now, can you allow me to share my screen if you wouldn't mind?
Sorry. I did not. Okay, you should be able to now. My bad.
Oh.
Sorry, production.
It's all right. I'll let the media department know.
Thank you, please. That's on me. Audience, that's on me.
All right, let's see. So today we are going to be looking at stereotypes, which we were just talking about. When we think about who do people want to hang out with is one kind of stereotype. So If you look in the dictionary, what will you find? You'll find a definition that looks a lot like this: a standardized mental picture that is held in common by members of a group and that represents an oversimplified opinion, prejudiced attitude, or uncritical judgment. So that is true. But today, what I would like to do is complicate that picture a little bit. So psychologists generally agree that stereotypes may be accurate or false. We'll get into the details about some of these as we go along. But it's important to realize that we sometimes think that stereotypes, that we get confused because we think if a stereotype is something we should avoid, how come some stereotypes seem true? And it's just, life is much more complicated than we want it to be, right? So a stereotype may be accurate or false. It can describe positive or negative characteristics. It can be intentional. In fact, communities can cultivate stereotypes as a point of pride. Or it can also be automatic, something that we inhale through our community, through our media exposure, through our just day-to-day lives, that just gets triggered automatically in our brain. Our brains are designed to categorize things. If we weren't able to categorize things and we walked into a room, we'd have to look at every single object and think, is this something I can sit on? Is this something I can sit on? Is this something I can sit on? Instead, our brains scan the room, see something that has 4 legs and a seat, or 3 legs and a seat, or some approximation of a seat, and thinks, look, it's a chair. So stereotyping is not necessarily avoidable or all bad. It is part of our natural human reaction. It's part of how we evolved. So it's important to also recognize that stereotypes can be consciously endorsed or rejected. So you can learn to evaluate your stereotypes and decide whether or not you are going to act on those stereotypes. So they can have, you may or may not have an impact on your behavior. So you may be aware that you have a stereotype about a certain type of person, and you choose not to allow that stereotype to express itself in your behavior. That's an important thing for us to, we don't want to adopt a defeatist attitude like, well, we're all just so prejudiced, we're all racist, we can't do anything right, so we might as well not even try. No, we can actually, there's lots of things that we can do that are very simple that can make a huge difference in the world and in our community. They also can have positive and negative functions and positive and negative outcomes. So let's look a little bit more deeply into what I'm talking about. So stereotypes may be accurate. So there's a stereotype that men are more violent than women. This isn't a nice stereotype, it's not a positive stereotype, but it is a stereotype that's based in fact. Men commit violent crimes more than 3 times as often as women. Does that mean that all men are violent? No. Does that mean that all men are, that men who are violent sometimes are always violent? No. But you can see how a stereotype exists so that we categorize, so that when we see a man walking down the street at us, we are automatically primed by our body that wants to continue to exist to say that person as a male may be more threatening to me than a female body, a female appearing body is going to be threatening to me. So there are stereotypes that can be accurate, and there are stereotypes that our body, that our lizard brains, if you will, have created over millennia to keep us alive. But then there are times when those stereotypes are inaccurate and they're based on information that we get from the news or from the media that aren't true. And we don't have, a lot of times because we don't have personal experience with someone or some group. So we rely on a stereotype, such as most drug users are Black. So when you imagine a drug user, that instantaneous image that enters your mind, not the image that you wait a beat and think of, oh no, like I can think, because I can think of plenty of people I went to high school with at an almost 100% white high school who used drugs. But the instantaneous image that comes to your mind when you think drug user is oftentimes Black. But the fact is that about 14 million whites and only 2.6 million African Americans report using an illicit drug. And this kind of gets into where the systemic racism comes in. I'm not going to go all the way down that road, but when 5 times as many whites are using drugs as African Americans, yet African Americans are sent to prison for drug offenses at 10 times the rate of whites. If you rely on crime statistics, that might suggest to you that the stereotype is true, when this is a good example of how racism impacts the generation of our stereotypes. So they can be positive and they can be negative. So there's a stereotype, unfortunately, or fortunately, depending on your point of view, that white people are smart. So if you see a white guy in glasses and a bow tie, you probably think he's going to be pretty smart, and he might be able to help you with your math homework, or he might be able to, be a great leader for your church council. There could be negative stereotypes about white people too, though. This is our friend Jim Carrey in Ace Ventura. White people can't dance. That's a negative stereotype about white people. It can be true. I'm not a very good dancer. It can also be untrue, because there are plenty of white people who are fantastic dancers. They're on the Houston Rockets dance team, or the terrible Dallas Cowboys, or what have you. But we have this stereotype, this negative stereotype that white people can't dance. So one group can have positive and negative stereotypes. And the positive stereotypes aren't always a good thing. One way that this is really evidenced is in terms of the model minority myth of Asian Americans. You see this cover of Time magazine talking about the whiz kids. So why is it bad to have a positive stereotype? That, like, what could possibly be wrong with thinking, well, Asian American kids are just smarter, they're harder working, they are more high achieving? Those are all compliments, right? Well, here's where those compliments kind of become a little more challenging. For one thing, it erases differences among individuals. So if you have a person, I think we all can remember a time when somebody had an expectation of us that we didn't live up to, and how shameful and defeating that felt. So if you are somebody who is an Asian American and you are in fact terrible at math because you are just a random human being who has skills in some areas and lack of skills in other areas, if you're told, come on, you're Asian, aren't you supposed to be good at math? How do you think that makes you feel, right? It also erases the differences within the diaspora of Asian Americans, because there are privileges with some Asian identities that have afforded them more opportunities to get higher education, to get higher paying jobs, that then other Asian Americans from lower status, either lower status castes or countries that are considered lower status, that are where their people are more marginalized, and those people have been denied access to education and to opportunities. And we're erasing like a huge population of people just by imagining this model minority. Another thing is that it perpetuates the foreigner status. So it just reminds someone that they are Asian, that they are hyphenated American, not true just Americans. And it erases racism faced by Asian Americans, which is something that we've really, as a country, had to reckon with COVID-19. We've seen a huge uptick in hate crimes and hate incidents related to people blaming Chinese people for causing the pandemic. In fact, my daughter, she came up with this really random thing. She saw a helicopter in the sky in the spring, and she was like, I hope that's not more Chinese people bringing coronavirus. And I was like, you are my daughter. Like, I do this all day for a living. Like, where is that coming from? And I had to explain to her, like, let's think about how that doesn't make sense. Like, yes, the virus originated in China, and my daughter is Swedish on her dad's side. So if a virus originated in Sweden, would it be your fault? Like, should everybody who's Swedish? And when you think about it that way, you realize, no, it just doesn't really make a lot of sense. And also, it can be harmful to the cause of racial justice because it perpetuates this idea that there are good minorities and bad minorities, that the reason that Asian American people get ahead is because they work harder or are smarter, or just have more God-given ability, if you will. And so that reinforces negative stereotypes about other groups that are really, their lack of achievement is based on the fact that they've been oppressed for hundreds of years. And the last thing that I wanted to talk about stereotypes is the idea of stereotype threats. So simply knowing that there's a stereotype against your group actually has the psychological impact of leading people to perform more poorly on a task than they otherwise would. So if you remind a girl that girls are not as good at math as boys, they will do worse on a subsequent math test than a girl who reads in a study that reads a passage that talks about girls and boys can both do good at math. So you take out the actual, everybody's equal in terms of ability, and they end up performing worse simply because they're reminded of the fact they belong to a group that performs poorly. And the other thing, I just read a really great column that talked about the idea that failure is not an option. So in this case, for Black, Indigenous, people of color in leadership roles in nonprofits, this is the sector that I'm in, that if you are a Black executive director, there can be so much more pressure on you because you may feel like you're representing your whole race.
Sure.
And that if you fail, the board of directors might say, well, we tried to give the job to a Black person and look how that went, rather than judging, like, maybe that person wasn't a good fit for this job, or maybe that person wasn't supported in a way that led them to success. But that's neither here nor there. In any case, people feel like they can't take the same risks. We as white people, particularly, like, I kind of gotten into reading business books for some weird reason, and you're all these ideas like you have to fail forward, you have to fail so many times before you can hit on your great big idea. And the stereotype, one of the problems with stereotypes is that we don't have, people with marginalized identities don't have that luxury. They are often considered to be representative of a whole people group.
That's correct. That is so correct.
So how can we avoid this? Well, I never just want to tell you all the things we're doing wrong. I want to give you some hope for going forward. It's not really that hard. I mean, that's not to say that you'll be perfect person and never cause any problems for anyone ever again your whole life. But if you can actually think, just bring to your consciousness, mindfulness we talk about in contemplative spaces, if you can be mindful of the stereotypes that you hold and when they may be activated, you can take that beat to say, I'm not going to react to that. So you may see a Black man coming toward you and you don't have to grip your purse. That may be the lizard brain reality that you hold because of the way that you've been conditioned, but we have choices in how we act. And one thing that I really came up for me this week is that stereotypes can be especially salient when you're tired, distracted, or stressed. So we were all under a lot of stress this week, thinking that the hurricane was going to come and do a lot of damage here in Houston. And you may find yourself with less ability to censor yourself, or with less bandwidth to have that awareness and mindfulness. So just because you are aware that you're less aware, you will become more aware.
Beautiful.
So I just wanted to say that stereotypes that are recognized can be rejected. It's really when we are unaware that we're operating out of a stereotype that we are unable to live the life that we want to live.
Sure. Yeah, this reminds me so much, and I think I've shared this story with you, Liz, before. The stereotyping. When I was in high school, and I graduated in '91. I remember, I came, the environment that I came from was very limited as far as to aspire for college, right? And my dad was an auto mechanic, but I never liked manual labor whatsoever. I mean, look at these hands, never. And I remember my senior year, they did some the counselors did some evaluation for all the students that were graduating, and the evaluation that I got back was all they were all promoting for me to look for careers that had to do with manual labor. And I remember thinking, this doesn't fit me whatsoever, and I didn't follow that particular or that particular recommendation. What I ended up doing, I went and applied for a bank, and then I became a banker, right? But years later, when you're talking about this type of stereotyping, is done very subtly.
Sure.
Institutional, or the infrastructure of corporations is done very subtle in the way they kind of influence, like you just said, that you fit this group and that's where you belong.
Yeah.
And I, of course, being a senior in high school, I wouldn't have had that type of realization, but I did find it strange that here's my guidance counselor that I spent some time with. She had no clue who I really was, because that did not fit me whatsoever. And well, of course, now you know that doesn't fit me. Manual labor, and not that there's anything wrong with manual labor, but just the assumption that because I'm a Hispanic individual, then that was my best fit. You know what I mean? But it happens. It does happen, and it's done in a very subtle way that even those that it's happening to, you don't even recognize, you don't realize it, even though you may suspect it, but you don't necessarily look into it. And then the other thing that I wanted to touch on, which is what Michael mentioned earlier about what we've seen in the on TV that has major influence on our thinking and our stereotype awareness or lack of. What you said earlier, Michael, the difference of how when a person of color commits a crime, the way they're approached to being arrested versus someone that, a white person. And we're seeing that right now. I mean, with how many times we've seen white individuals go in and do some mass murdering with a weapon, and they're walked out, when they're arrested. And if it's a person of color or a black individual, that's not the case. And so before I get your reflection on that, I found this this graphic, which is true, because the way the media labels these type of crimes. So when it's a Middle Eastern or a brown person, when it's a Middle Eastern, it's they're labeled as terrorists. When it's a black person or a brown person or a Hispanic, they're called thugs or gang members. And so when it's a white individual, it's a mental health issue. And so it just kind of touches on this labeling and stereotyping. What are your thoughts on that?
Yeah, that was a really great slideshow, Liz. Appreciative of it. I think for me, the most important thing is the beat and what you talked about. And that beat is, and it's so telling about the stressed or distracted or tired. We live in a society that people are just exhausted, and they won't take the time to give themselves the beat before they make the stereotype. And I think also, and again, not to blame anything else, there's a lot we got to peel back of ourselves, but like technology, if I don't get the answer I need now, I'm going to move on to the next thing, right? We desire quick response. And in a way, we've kind of trained ourselves to respond quickly
Mm-hmm.
in the moment instead of giving the beat, saying, what are we really
Mm-hmm.
seeing here? And your furniture metaphor was really helpful, because we just have to be willing to know and take the time. It takes training to have that beat reflex showing up more and more and more. Because if we don't train ourselves that way, then we're going to keep responding out of
Correct.
the fight or flight kind of moment, right?
Sure.
Absolutely. Yeah.
Yeah. Eddie,
Yeah. And
go ahead.
I just wanted to say that, you know, what I really wanted to encapsulate through this slideshow is the sort of omnipresence of stereotypes and the way that they affect our daily life 24/7. I mean, the ideas that you brought out about, you know, mass shooters is such a good and important one. It's something that we really need to look at. How did the young man in Kenosha who killed the protesters get treated in the newspaper as a potential police, a wannabe Marine or what have you, versus how did Tamir Rice, who had a toy gun at the age of 12, get treated when he got killed by police on site. And yet we probably aren't, not many of us are in charge of media messaging for, you know, like NBC News or something like that. So what can we do in our sphere of influence? And when we were brainstorming what the session was going to be about, you told me a story that really hit home for me. You were telling me about an after-school program that you ran in a past life, and there was a teenage boy who would come into the after-school program and kind of, it sounded like he made himself a little nest, if you will, and just would take a nap at the beginning of the after-school program instead of engaging in the many like wonderful enrichment activities that were offered or doing his homework or what have you. And the very well-meaning white volunteer was like, oh, is there something wrong in so-and-so's home life that he's, you know, so asleep? Like, is he unable to find rest in his home, or, you know, perhaps he's working multiple jobs, you know? God, did that come from a good place, right? Like, I care about why this young man is tired.
Right.
But what I didn't interrogate is the fact that if I saw Brad or Johnny, the 17-year-old white random kid, come shuffling into my program in his athletic clothes, and he laid down to take a nap, would my first instinct would be like, oh, look at him, he's probably, you know, tired from his football practice, you know, like 2-a-days are really killer out there in this heat. And I don't think that my first thought isn't that this so-and-so Hispanic youth has also been at practice playing soccer and is tired because of that, and has a wonderful home life and doesn't have a job, you know, like isn't providing for his family or anything. He's just a regular kid who's just regular old tired because teenagers are exhausted, right?
Correct.
Maybe he's up too late texting, who knows?
Sure.
So like when you mentioned that to me, it just really hit home to me, the insidiousness of our stereotypes, and how even when we're trying explicitly to question those stereotypes, we aren't questioning them deeply enough. Sure. And that takes a lot of time and work and effort and patience. But it's just something to, you know, that I wanted to bring to our listeners. Sure.
Yeah, no, I appreciate you telling that story, and you're right. And, you know, even to go further in my former student's story, is that not only was he tired because he was one of my high school tutors for my elementary kids. So there was a 30-minute window before he would get started to tutor, and that's the reason why he would take that nap. So you're right. I mean, being approached that way by this volunteer, you know, it complicated all kinds of things. How do I react to such a, it was a bit of, it did offend me. It's like, wait, are you kidding me? Like, this kid is a superstar, but this other story that you're running with, to me at that moment, it was like, how do you generate that story right away and tell his, you assume this story about him when that has nothing to do, like, didn't identify him whatsoever, yeah. What I wanted to share to go further into our discussion and the final phase of our discussion, we've been doing a series on Romans 12. And I know, Michael, you've been encouraged, even the men's group, to read it, several times. There's so much in scripture, in this letter that Paul wrote. But I want us to give our reflections on the first 3 verses of chapter 12.
Okay.
And it says, therefore, I urge you, brothers and sisters, in view of God's mercy, to offer your bodies as a living sacrifice, holy and pleasing to God. This is your true and proper worship. Do not conform to the pattern of this world, but be transformed by the renewing of your mind. Then you will be able to test and approve that God's will is his good, pleasing, and perfect will. For by the grace given to me, I say to everyone among you not to think of himself more highly than he ought to think, but to think with sober judgment, each according to the measure of faith that God has assigned. And one of the things that comes to mind right away is well-roundedness. This is what I'm hearing here. Is this, and we've been talking about this in every conversation, that our faith has to be a progressive, deepening, continuing awareness of what God wants, where God wants to lead us, and how we want to, and how we're going to display that that transformation to the world. And that's what I'm listening here in this well-roundedness to continue to equip ourselves. What are any reflections, Michael, on this? I know you've been quite,
Yeah, I've been hanging out. Romans 12 and I have been dear friends.
Sure.
There's, I've got a complicated relationship with Mr. Paul here. And I think Romans 12 is like some of his greatest hits. Like, there's some one-liners in here. And that's like, when I'm talking about the idea of the beat that Liz brought up when she said, the beat before you think, like, that beat for me is cultivated through my relationship with Christ.
Sure.
And Christ really pushed an ethic of living that was countercultural.
That's correct.
That demanded us to think about the flip side of the argument.
That's
like,
right.
To turn the other cheek. What? Like, in that, like, if your enemy, harms you, turn the other cheek, right? And like, in that society, it was very much a backlash, respond, you get what you get, eye for an eye, that whole ideal. But Jesus teaches us a different way, a different way of seeing and responding and listening in the world. And
Sure.
Romans 12 is Paul just speaking out some of those attributes here and there.
Mm-hmm.
I think for me, the line that catches, and that's a beautiful thing. If you read a text for like a number of weeks, you pick out different things, sort of like Lectio Divina, which I know that you are a big fan of.
Sure.
And it's good contemplative practice. Like, and I've done some of that with that. The word that really popped out to me is offer your bodies as living sacrifices. And I think especially as a white person in today's world, a white Christian, like, when you offer your whole self as a living sacrifice, you're making a choice. You're making a choice to say, I am going to turn away from what I want, what I desire, and B, I'm offering it up willingly for God to change and to use.
Yes.
And not just, in my prayer life, but like through other people.
That's
like
right.
Other people to sharpen you. It's like that proverb, iron sharpens iron. Like, we should constantly strive as we offer ourselves, our whole selves, not just our pinky toe in the deep end.
Sure.
But when we offer our entire selves, like, man, the possibility of changes. But we have to make that choice daily.
That's right.
That's the killer thing, is that you make a conscious choice.
Yeah.
Especially white people, we have to make the conscious choice to allow ourselves to be open to learn more from our friends of color and open our minds. I think Christ calls us to that. Christ calls all of us to come to the table with open arms, all of us, to be willing to be transformed. And so that's, I mean, first three verses.
Yeah, that's a great reflection. Liz, anything from your what?
Yeah, no, I love Michael. I love that. I really appreciate it. And I mean, God, how terrifying, right? Like a living sacrifice. Are you kidding me?
Terrifying.
And yet, you know, when we were talking about this, Victor, you know, I was saying I don't like to give a diagnosis without a prescription. I don't like to share all the things that are wrong with us as white folks and then say, you know, well, these are the ways that you think and you're irredeemable, so just hate yourself.
Sure.
And yet, what does it take? Nothing, in my opinion, less than becoming a living sacrifice for God and throwing everything you have into just today. Today, I am going to live the life God wants me to live. I don't know if y'all watch The Unbreakable Kimmy Schmidt, and she just talks about getting through the next 10 seconds. I mean, 10 seconds is rather, but you know, don't like to modify that. Just today, you know, just today, get through today. Examining yourself, living the way that God wants. And tomorrow's another day. Yeah,
what you both are touching on is the intentionality to really lean in towards God's spirit and the presence of what he's doing in us, right? That's in the contemplative teachings, that is what's considered moving towards a mature way of leading a Christian life. This is when Paul talks about at one point you drank milk, but now you need solid food. He's talking about going to the next level of the more we are in the kenosis, as Michael just covering, and this day-by-day examination, self-examination that Liz is talking about, is lending myself towards a mature way of leading a Christian life. And so what happens in that maturity is that it aligns me to God's worldview, not my worldview anymore. And that's why the renewing of the mind, do not let the world influence you, because the world is broken. We're all broken. So we can't necessarily rely on our own understanding, because we are misleading each other. And so depending on our agenda, depending on the selected group that we select to be with and the ones we end up excluding, that's how we lead these narratives, right? And so that can't really be a solid foundation for our faith. And so God is inviting us to come into his presence, and God guides us with his wisdom in order to ignite our compassion and our love for others. I saw this great quote, and I posted on my Facebook, and I want to share this with you based on what we're seeing right now. Father Greg Boyle, which lately you read his book, Tattoos on the Heart. And he talks about, in a conversation that they invited him to talk about what's going on in Chicago. And this has been going on for quite some time, and the violence there. And he says, you know, everybody wants to bring a solution of more law and order, maybe military, like this enforcing way of settling things down, or in some cases demolishing that violence, right? He says nobody has taken the time, speaking of the beat, taken the time to ask the question, what is the deep despair here that's causing this kind of pain? Or what is the deep pain that's causing this despair for it to be displayed with this violence? He said nobody wants to sit and ask that question, because that's where restoration will begin. That's where healing will begin. And so when our reaction is, and Liz's term that she used today, lizard reaction is immediately saying they're so violent and they're tearing up the streets but nobody wants to have that beat time to say, what is the pain that's causing this outcry that's been going on? This is not something new. Time Magazine had a famous a picture in the 1960s of the riots that went on during this, during the Martin Luther King assassination. And then, we could place that same portrait here in the Time magazine 2020, and it's the same thing. So there's something going on that's not connecting, where we have started a healing process. And so we're constantly criticizing, judging it, and then going against each other, arguing. And so anyways, so I want to read this to y'all, and we can end this, and I'd love to have your final thoughts. This was by Reverend Dr. Ron Bell. I think you were so busy looking for a riot that you missed the gathering of the grieving. I think you were so busy looking for looters that you missed the lament and heartbreak of a community. I think you were so busy looking for trouble that you missed the tragedy of systematic racialized trauma on the bodies of Black and brown people. Tonight, tomorrow, even the next day, I beg of you, looking again, look again. Any closing thoughts or reflections from either one of you or both?
I mean, look at the disciples next to Jesus. Like, they are a beautiful, like, narrative foil amidst the walking and journeying of Jesus. And I love that intentionality piece, because you could tell when the disciples weren't being intentional, and they were thinking with their human brains and not thinking of a kingdom-minded brain, that Jesus was trying to paint the picture. I'm so thankful that we have the disciples to show, especially Peter, to show the very humanistic ways of the people that were near Jesus, and that they didn't catch everything. Like, we laud the disciples a lot, but they were making mistakes too. And they really got it the closer they saw death.
That's right.
And we are seeing so much death on television of Black and brown bodies. And it's not right. And it hurts. I think it hurts Jesus' heart.
Yeah.
But my prayer is that we are becoming more attuned with the reality of this pain, and that we can truly be people who work on that sacred beat of being able to stop, think, maybe ask the question, what would Jesus do here? Maybe ask the question, what's the right thing to do? And give ourselves that time before we respond so quickly to the built stereotypes inside all of us.
Yeah, appreciate that. Thank you, Michael.
Yeah.
Liz?
Thank you. Thank you, Michael, so much. That was beautiful. And what comes to mind for me is just the African proverb: the child who is not embraced by the village will burn it down to feel its warmth.
Wow.
Just let your heart go out to the people who are hurting so badly that they are destroying the city they live in to make a point. When a toddler is just so angry that they're just reaching the point of destruction, you as a parent, you have to learn how to look at the root cause of the tantrum rather than simply focus. This is not to equate rioters with tantruming toddlers, but to offer a relationship that I think that we might be able to fasten onto within our lived experience.
That's right. That's right.
So there's deep, like you're saying, root causes, and so do take that beat.
Yeah. Well, thank you to both of you so much. Michael, thanks again for joining us. I look forward to hopefully we see you in the next series as well.
Woo!
And I know Pastor Jenny and Pastor Jennifer,
awesome.
Pastor Brad and Jim have all kind of also reached out that they'll be a part of the next series. So appreciate that. We want to thank all of you who have been keeping up with the God is Love series, and we want to invite you to come to the next one. If you need to rewatch any of our conversations because something stuck with you or something that you wanted to relearn or revisit, please do so. And then continue to send us your comments, your questions. We really appreciate that, because that gives us an idea of how to direct the series. So this is really a collaboration. This is not just Liz and I trying to tell people how to do this, because we're on our own journey searching.
Yeah, right.
So we appreciate all of you so much, and we're just asking you to continue to intercede in your prayer about what's going on in our social, in our society. That what is painful for us to carry that and sympathize with that and lament that. What isn't, and what the things that we're watching that are not just, for us to continue to intercede for justice to happen, and to get away more from our critical minds and allow God to be the one that provides us with that compassion, that we're willing to be ignited by his compassion. So anyway, thank you so much to both of you. I know we're going back to the drawing board, so I can't wait to celebrate with you on that. And Michael, I'll see you soon, my brother.
See you soon. Thanks, Liz. Thank you, Victor. Y'all take care. Appreciate it.
We are so glad you joined us for this week's conversation. You're invited to leave any comments or questions in the comments below. I want to leave you with these encouraging words from Jesus from the Sermon of the Mount. Blessed are the peacemakers, for they shall be called the children of God. We'll see you next time.